everybody, it's Sue here from slowideas.com. I'm back for another evening of sewing our summer tunic together. My iPhone camera decided it did not want to talk to my laptop today, so instead I'm using my laptop camera, which is not that great, sorry, and my regular webcam, which is high definition, and so that's what I'll use to show the details. Unfortunately, I won't be able to show anything in great detail because iPhone camera no play tonight. Sorry, but here we go. When we were last here, we put together our collar, and now we're ready to start attaching it to the garment. One thing I said I was going to do behind the scenes and didn't end up doing, my bad, is baste this edge, and so I'm just gonna grab some of the thread off of my sewing machine. That ought to do it, and baste that together. So here's an interesting little thing about sewing machine thread. Sewing machine thread is made by twisting fibers together, and it twists in one direction. For some reason, and I read an article in Threads magazine about why this actually happens, but if the direction that it comes off of the spool, if you sew in the direction that comes off the spool, somehow you will end up with fewer snarls in your hand sewing thread. Since I learned that, I've always tried to be mindful of which direction the thread is going, and this is not something I would have ever thought would make a difference, but it actually has significantly reduced the amount of snarls and tangles that I get in my thread when I'm hand sewing things. So when I pull thread off of a spool to use for hand sewing, I will put the knot in the end that I pulled off, not the sort of further end. So that helps me remember that I'm sewing with the direction of the twist of the thread. So there's a small little piece of sewing knowledge that my home ec teacher sure as heck never taught me, and I didn't know at all. But man, oh man, has it made a difference for me. So what I'm doing right now is I'm pinning my collar pieces together so that the rest of the collar lays flat here. And I'm also going to switch us over to tabletop view so that you can see me a little bit better. There we go. That makes a bit of a difference. Alrighty. Yeah, the lighting's pretty insane around here. I have these really, really bright work lights because it helps me see even when everything around me is dark and I don't get eye strain. But that's a heck of a lot of light. And then I also have this one over here, which is currently lighting my sewing machine. So when we do start sewing, not that you'll be able to see because I haven't got the phone camera today. Anyways, okay. I'm gonna baste the edges together, and just to go with the flow of, good hand sewing, I'm actually going to start in the middle and baste to the outer edges. This just helps me make sure that my collar doesn't get pushed around. Like if I were to start from one end and sew to that end, my hands putting pressure on the collar could actually push it so that the layers of fabric twist on each other, and then I'll end up with weird little bumpies in my collar, and I don't want that. So I am sewing a fairly long running stitch, about maybe 3/8 of an inch away from the edges of the fabric. I want to make sure that this hand sewing does not show up on the finished garment. I'm not going to bother to go back and pull it out. It's going to stay in there. When you're hand stitching for basting. You don't have to put a knot in the end. Just take a couple of back stitches with your hand and that will usually stay in. You can actually do that back stitch trick at the beginning of a basting seam as well. But I find that doing the knot in the direction, on the end of the thread that I know was the last to come off the spool helps me keep my thread going in the right direction. And yeah, you know what? Thread direction in the grand scheme of things isn't going to make a huge amount of difference to the quality of your finished product, but I found that it makes a difference to my sanity because I'm not having to deal with constant snarling, twisting thread when I hand sew things. It used to be one of my least favorite aspects of doing any kind of hand stitching work was that snarling that my thread would do. So I'm really glad I learned that from that article in the magazine, and now I've shared it with you. Huzzah! Okay, so this gives us one solid piece of collar that's not going to come, the layers aren't going to shift against each other at all as I'm sewing it onto my garment. Yay! Let's do a little back stitch there. Cut my threads. And I have my pin cushion here, which is just my needles pin cushion, and then I have my magnetic pin cushion. I have lots of things to stick pokey things in. I'm well equipped. Okay. So there we go, and now it is time to attach the collar. So I'm just going to see if there's any specific instructions on here for doing the collar, or if it's just something that I will do in the normal way I do collars. It's just something I do in the normal way. Okay. Alrighty, I'm going to work with the front of the garment away from me for the time being. Okay, I'm putting the I want the interfaced side, so the slightly more reinforced side of the collar, I want that to be facing up. So that's the right side of the collar. And this is telling me to clip the neck edge of the garment to the stay stitching. Rightio. What that does is makes it easier for me to straighten out this edge. You can't see my stay stitching very well because I sewed it in black just in case it was showing up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sharp scissors and I'm going to cut into the edge sort of perpendicular to where that stay stitching was that we did back a few days ago. And I'm especially paying attention to doing this in a couple of places where the neckline curves. That's going to help this straighten itself out so that it's a little bit easier for me to apply the collar. So mostly on the back neck edge, but one or two in the front neck edge as well. Okay, on outside, pin collar facing side to neck edge, matching centers back, placing small dot at shoulder seams and ends of collar at large dots. Hey, so my dots, they're trapped to the side. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to find the pattern piece. Once again, never throw away your pattern pieces. There it is. And I'm going to work backwards from the center back. I did mark the center. Yeah, there's the center. So, and there's my notches. Okay, I've got that. And then the dots themselves are here. So, just grab my fabric marker. And mark that so I can see it, flip it over, use center marking. Where is it? There we go. Got the notch there. Yes, ooh, see the notch? This marker, because it's a tailor's marker, it fades out after, like, so that was a day that it faded out. So it's nice to know that it won't like stay permanently on any garment that you've sewn where you've got your marker showing, but it is a bit of a pain in the butt that the marks I made are no longer visible. Okay, so I'm putting the center of my garment, there it is, center of my collar. I'm lining that up with my center back seam. Now, I added the center back seam to this tunic. There normally wouldn't be one, but I would have the center back marked. So I'm gonna just stick pin in there. And then my dots go at the shoulder seams. And I'm gonna try and make sure that they line up there. And stick a pin through and make sure that my seam allowances go the way I want them to. I want them to go towards the front, so I'm going to pin them so that they go towards the front. Get my other shoulder seam positioned. Okay, so what's happening here is the collar is a little bit longer than the neckline piece itself. This can happen for a couple of reasons. One is I may not have done a large enough seam in the center back, but it's also possible that I didn't take up enough in my seam allowances here. But what I can do is I can move maybe like a millimeter out on each side, just to make my day a little easier. Not too much though. And then this is why we did that stay stitching, and this is why we clipped those edges, because when I have the edges, when I can like pull the collar piece so that it's actually straight, then I can actually see that I can make my collar and my shirt back be the same length, and that's what I'm going for here. So I'm going to throw a few pins in there. This side, it seems to just be a little bit easier. I think maybe I put, I did more little choppy chops in that side. So I'll just do a couple more clips on this side. That should help it straighten itself out. Voila. Good, good, good. And on this side, it's fairly easy to get it straight. What I'm trying to do is get the raw edges of the collar to line up with the raw edges of my shirt back. Throw a couple pins in there. And then I'm going to go around to the front side, and this should be a matter of just pinning the collar directly to that piece, because there's not too much curve here. Where there is curve, I'm just going to release it by trimming to, but not through the stay stitching. That just, it releases the curve a little bit and lets it go straighter along the edge. And I will pin it in place there. Now what I'm not sure about is whether this pattern actually gave me a mark for where the collar should end. If it did give me the mark and I erased it, or I made it in this erasable disappearing ink, then I was a silly goober. Yeah, it did give me a mark. So now I can kind of just compare, like from the side seam, marking out my seam allowance, how far down it should go. Okay, I'm in good shape. It's going right to where it should. I'm gonna mark that. Actually, I don't need to mark it. I've got it pinned now. I'll just compare that on the other side. So compare the other side, of course I have to flip the pattern over. So this is the reverse. And I'll start with take out my seam allowance and follow it down and, oh, that's not the right seam allowance. Okay. Okay, there's my seam allowance, and I would want my dot to be here. Oh, I can see the dot on this side. Goody. So I want my collar to end where that dot is. That way it will go the same distance down the front and the back. Now, what I see is that when it's marked like that, there's actually quite a bit of extra fullness in the shirt front. And there isn't on the other side. Something's going on weird here. So I'm going to hold this up by the side seams. This collar looks a little bit large and ridiculous, actually. It does look a little touristy. And I'm going to measure how far up from the center front this collar is coming down. So this one's coming down to 4 1/4 inches. And on this side, it's coming down to 4 inches. So it's going to fall 1/4 inch further down on the shirt. And that's really weird, because this side has a lot, it just seems to work a lot better. That's kind of odd. So I'm actually going to try to bring it down 1/4 inch so that it's the same. And that's when we see, yeah, there's some extra fabric here. So I'm going to just try to stretch my collar piece a little bit. Maybe I shrank it too much by using the steam iron, lots and lots on that. Maybe the side or the shoulder seam is not quite sitting right. I'm going to get that lining up so that both sides are the same. Even if it's not the right same measurement, I just want the two sides to be the same so that it doesn't look lopsided. Okay, now we're cooking with fire. This is starting to look a little bit better. Yeah, that's lining up nice and flat. I didn't have the shoulder seam flat. I had it rotated around too much. This is one of those things where you just kind of gotta like fiddle and stuff like that until it feels right. Okay. And there we go. Pin that in place. Now, the rash and rapid thing to do would be to just take this over to your machine and sew it on. That way lies grand disappointment and much screwing up and having to seam rip. We're going to use our hand needle once again. Take some more thread off of our machine, off the top, not the bottom. And we're gonna hand sew this with big stitches, like loose stitches, to the garment, because there's a lot of turns and curves in shoulders, and if I put this directly on the machine, chances are that those turns and shoulders, or turns and curves, like I'll have to sew it with the garment on the bottom because it's the longer layer. If you're trying to make something shorter and longer fit together, you put the longer layer on the bottom because it gets pulled through by the feed dogs and it stretches it just, or it shortens it up. Is that the way it goes? Longer on the bottom. Yeah, you put the longer one on the bottom because it pulls it through a little bit faster than the top and it uses up the extra fabric. But as it went around, I could end up catching wrinkles of my shirt in the seam where I'm attaching my collar, and I'm not gonna like the result. So I'm going to hand sew the layers together. And that way I can prevent any mishaps from occurring. So this is kind of the episode where everybody on YouTube just watches Sue do hand sewing. Sorry, not terribly exciting, but the reason I'm hand sewing is very important, and this is a learning experience. So there. So by holding the edge with my fingers, I can feel what's going on the underside. I wonder if I can actually get this camera to zoom in. Where's my mouse? Where did my mouse go? There we go. Let's see if I can zoom in. Camera control, zoom. That's good. Apply. Okay. Okay, we're a little zoomed in and now you can see a little bit better. I'll just move over here somewhat. Okay. Everything's still going well on YouTube. Feel free to throw a comment in the comments if you're watching. Ask me questions. Tell me how your favorite professional sports team. No, don't. Just don't. I don't want to know. There are no professional sports teams playing right now because of COVID-19. So if your favorite professional sports team is playing, I really don't want to know about it. Okay, so as I go past the shoulder seam, I am just kind of making sure that the seam allowance of that sits towards the front, which is how I want it sitting. I'm going to take a couple extra stitches there just to make sure that goes through the way I want it to. See, I can check the top, I can check the bottom, I can take my time and make sure that this collar is going on really smoothly. Of course, the couture way to do it would be to start from the middle and sew outwards on both sides so that it would stay balanced. But I got enough pins in here, as the inside of my hand can tell you, that I'm trusting it's not going to move too much. And my hand sewing is going just inside where the 5/8 inch line would be. So this hand sewing also isn't going to show up on the finished garment. One hopes. I can always just go in there with my little mini scissors and take it out if it does. Okay, there I'm at the center. Coming around the curve. Can you still see? Good. Here's my other shoulder seam coming up. Ow. The other thing that's really nice is that when I am sewing this on the machine, because I've already attached the layers with hand stitching, I won't have to worry about sewing over pins or removing the pins as I'm going because the pins won't be there. Hand sewing. Ow! Not the most peaceful thing when I keep pricking myself with the needle and the pins. So I get down to this end and I'm just going to take a couple of back stitches, like literally go back from where my thread came out and put my needle in again. That anchors that edge to the fabric. Maybe one or two more. To get it to stay down in place. Okay. Make a little knot and I'm done. Okay, so my collar is now attached to my garment with hand stitching. What would happen next if I was using the facings that come with this pattern is I would take the facings and I would attach them at the same time as I machine stitch the collar on. I am not using the facings. I hate facings. They're one of my least favorite things to sew and to wear. Instead of facings, I am using this bias binding method, and this is regular broadcloth. This is black broadcloth, so it's pretty cheap ass fabric. I think this is 100% cotton, but honestly, it wouldn't really matter if it was 100% cotton or a blend of cotton and polyester, but cotton is probably the nicest. This is a linen garment, so it's, you know, it's nice to use more natural fibers. And what I'm going to do is I have made this bias binding, this bias tape myself from a previous project, and I didn't need as much as I made. So I have some left over, yay! Which I'm going to use on this project. Let's see how much I have in total. I honestly don't know how much I need. I need enough to go around my armhole twice. So that's about that much. Twice. And the rest of that can do my collar. So I'm gonna just sort of trim it over here. Leave the rest for armholes. If you want to make your own bias tape, there are lots of tutorials online for how to do it. This is not straight strips of fabric. This is actually cut diagonally. So the grain of the fabric goes like that and like that. And what that does is it makes it slightly stretchy and good for going around curves. So what I want to do with this is I want to cover up this collar seam. I don't want that itching my back. And I don't know if sometimes you've noticed t-shirts will have a strip across that collar seam that covers it up. And it's usually a slightly less stretchy material than the rest of the garment because that helps to hold the neckline's shape and prevents it from stretching. I'm not worried about this one stretching too much. I just need to cover it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this inch wide fabric and I'm going to see if it'll do what I need it to. So I want to fold it in half. I need my iron to be up to temperature. I should have turned it on before I started. So I'll kind of just show you what I'm planning to do here to cover up this collar seam, but also to finish the rest of the neck edge. I'm making this up as I go, so I'm really hoping it works out. I know that at some point I will need to have my center sewn so that it holds its curve. So I'm actually going to come over here and just finish that stay stitching a little bit better because there's some gaps in the way I sewed it because I was sewing it from one direction and then the other. Oh, that's a zigzag stitch. So. Sorry you can't see what's going on the machine very well, but most of this episode is actually just tabletop work, so you're not going to miss too much, and I'll figure out what's wrong with my iPhone tomorrow. Okay, so I've got this corner fairly well reinforced. It's not going anywhere. And I'm going to trim right down into the V, right to where that stitching stops. I want to be able to turn this corner really sharply. So oh geez, you really can't see that very well. So there's the fabric as I cut it out. I've cut that down to the stay stitching, and what I'll be doing is turning it inside out like that, and I'll be covering up these raw edges inside with one consistent piece of bias binding. It will have it will kind of have a join down here. Not really sure how I'm going to do that yet. It'll probably end up being some kind of engineered mitering. Let's cross our fingers. Okay, so back to my bias binding here. I'm folding it in half, and I'm gonna iron that. Once again, cotton is really great because it holds a crease really well. Polyester fabrics, like artificial fabrics, don't crease quite so nicely. And they don't hold their creases very well unless they have a certain amount of natural fiber content in them. I really hope I have a long enough strip here. I'm actually starting to doubt myself, but I can always make more binding. Okay, and then I'm going to come back to the top here, and I'm going to fold the edge into the middle and iron it again. And I mean, I did a pretty crap job of cutting out this bias strip when I did it, so the edges are a bit rough, but because I'm folding it, those edges will get tucked inside and it won't matter so much. So this might end up being a really narrow binding for what I'm trying to do with it. We'll find out. Okay, so, all right, what I'm going to do now is on the right side of the fabric, I'm going to pin my binding, and I'm going to pin it so that there's about an inch overlapping that X, so it'll go in an X as it goes around. I really hope I have a long enough piece here. I can use the other piece. And I'm going to open it up and lay this down so that the top crease, my little 1/4 inch crease, is going to be open, and I'm using that, and I'm going to sort of line that up with my fingers and feel for where my stay stitching is on the inside, and I'll be pinning that into place. And we're going to go all the way around, and we're going to go onto where the collar starts here, and we're just going to pin that in place. Like that, so that it's the stay stitching and the hand stitching that I did on the collar is all going to be further to the edge than this crease. This crease should probably go at about the 5/8 inch line, and you know what, I could measure it with my gauge. Yeah, I'm doing it about 5/8. You get to know what 5/8 looks like, honestly. I'm not pinning on exactly on the 5/8 line. I'm pinning it slightly away from that so I can see what I'm doing. But I'm just gradually going around, getting it the right distance, and pinning it in place. As you go around this curve, what happens is these under parts of the garment, they kind of they will twist a little bit. I'm just going to give myself a little bit more camera room here. So you're going to have to be aware, like right there, it has caught itself. So I'll take that out, and I'll smooth out the shirt fabric, and I'll repin it. Yeah. Sometimes I think my pins are dull. I think I need new pins. I really want glass head pins because they don't get scorched when you accidentally iron on them. I think I have a mix of glass head and plastic pins here. The plastic pins, sewing pins, honestly, they're not that cheap. However, the glass head ones will last a really long time, and they stay sharp, and that means you can pin really with a lot of preciseness, and not worry too much about catching stitches when you're putting a pin through your fabric. If you catch one of the threads, one of the woven threads of your fabric, and pull it, you can actually create a snag in the fabric. So having sharp, thin, strong pins actually does make for better sewing. So there you go. All right, I'm back around to the front, and I have blissfully just enough fabric to make it around. I've got a couple inches left. Something that's really bugging me though is I have a join in my bias strip right here at what will be really close to the edge of the front. So what I might actually do is kind of back it up and go back around. No, I'm not going to. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is a demo project. I don't want to be here all night. So I've got to the end and I've got my 2 loose bits, and this is where I realize this is where I'm going to do my miter edge. And honestly, that's a really tricky thing to try to explain. What it does basically is I will be sewing, because these ones will be sewn around, and this edge will meet just below where I trimmed to, and then I want to make these strips connect together. And I'm actually going to do that with hand stitching, I think, instead of trying to sew on my machine a miter, because I'm really not sure I can do that properly. I think what it calls for is to know where the fold is. Actually, maybe I can do this. So I've flattened out my front piece on the center fold, and I've got things really well lined up here. And I can see where these pieces will need to be sewn in order to go right down the front and turn inside and make a perfect little V on the inside. So I am going to just, this is like winging it here, folks. That's the line I'm going to sew across these pieces. I'm going to pull out some of the other pins near the edges. I'm going to pull that away from my garment in case I fuck it up, pardon my language. And I'm going to take this over here onto my sewing machine. I'm going to just sew down that line. Freewheeling, no instructions, just giving it my best shot. Ooh, that wasn't a very nicely ended seam. Not at all. I'm gonna regret ending that seam that way. Okay, press this. And here we go, cutting things. I'm going to cut that to 1/4 inch. Okay, now I may regret doing that before I sewed the rest of it on, but haha, we'll just do our best. Pin that on. There, there. Pin this back in place. Okay, so I'm going to bring my sewing machine over a little bit. I'm sorry you can't see any better because my iPhone camera isn't working, so I can't do the machine cam. But I'm going to bring this under my sewing foot. Oh, I should have pressed that seam allowance open there. I'll just give it a little bit of finger love. Okay, so I'm putting this under the knee, under the presser foot. Oh, you know what else I'm going to do? I'm going to remove this extra storage compartment from my sewing machine, and that makes this space a lot more open and easy to navigate around and get fabric onto. Okay, here we go, folks. Oh yeah, the way I ended that seam last time was no bueno, and my machine is totally messed up and the threads are not happy. So I'm gonna have to take that away. I'm going to have to rethread my machine. The top looks fine. Just gonna pull out the thread and rethread it. I actually saw a video today that said you should never pull your thread out backwards from your needle, and I've never heard that, but the excuse given, or the reason given, was because when you pull it against the direction of that thread twist, you're going to create more lint in your machine, and that's going to mean you have to have more maintenance done. And you know what? That had never even occurred to me, but it seems like a completely legit story, so I'll have to change my habits. Okay, we're gonna try this again. I've rethreaded the machine, and hopefully I am landing that needle in where it needs to start. And I'm gonna sew around. I'm gonna pull out my needles or my pins as I go. Here are the decks here. And I want to try to have the raw edge of all of this line up with my 5/8 inch allowance. But I definitely don't want to use up too much of my binding. Okay, as I go around the corner here, I have to reposition the shirt underneath so that the folds as it goes over the shoulder seam aren't getting caught up. Is that going in the right direction? Yes, it is, because I hand stitched it in place. Oh, what's that all about over there? Oh, my pins are sticking down here. Oh, hopefully I didn't just sew a wrinkle into this. We'll see when I've finished stitching. Should have been paying more attention. Come down here, and I want to meet up with the start of my stitching at the front of the V, and it lines up perfectly. Yay! Okay, so finish that properly, and then I can pull it out of the machine and see how I did with the under part of the shirt. Okay, I don't think I sewed any major flaws into it. Yay! Okay, so having sewn a seam, now I press it. It's easy to press these front bits because they're mostly straight, but I might need a little help going around the corners of the back here. And that's where my tailoring ham comes in. I love it when a plan comes together. Honestly, this is so cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I will trim this raw edge, and I'm going to fold over maybe like a very scant 1/4 inch on this fabric, and I will fold it into itself, and I'm going to actually hand stitch that to my linen. I could machine stitch it, however, as it goes around the wider curve, I expect it's going to need to stretch a little bit. I expect there will be lots of places where it's very challenging. I could actually just probably sew it around its own seam allowance and then fold it to the inside like that. But I'm going to need to fasten that down in some way. Otherwise, just like a facing, it's just going to flip around. So basically all I've done here is replace a wide facing with a bias strip. And so it'll get fastened down and tacked in place with little tiny stitches. This linen is great for doing little stitches on, little hand stitches, because it won't show through on the outside. So that is how things are going to look. So let's just see if I can pin this into place and show you how it'll end up looking on the finished garment. Put my collar under. Oh, my pin just broke. It's hard because I haven't ironed this yet, or ironed the bias strip yet. Okay, there we go. So on the inside, it's going to just have this black strip that goes around the collar and comes down to the front, and then this wonderful piece of mitering that I did, it's going to flip itself to the inside carefully, and I might need to just trim some little threads here. It doesn't seem to have made itself very happy. There's something going on there. I may have to do a little bit of extra trimming. And there's a lot of overlapping threads going on there. Something happened. So I'll use my tiniest little pair of scissors and just trim it into the bottom row of stitching. And by making that a really clear edge, then I can turn it inside out. We're going to actually see if this works here, because I think it's going to look brilliant actually. Yep, it is. I'm going to just press that like that right now and set it in place. Pardon my language. Yeah, it's going to look terrific on that front edge. Yay, I've got a little bit of thread there that I need to pull out. I'm not sure what happened there. That's some of the stay stitching. But from the outside, it looks like that. From the inside, it looks like that. Booyah. Okay, I got some more hand stitching ahead of me. Honestly, you don't need to be around for this. It's kind of boring. I'll show you the results tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, what we'll be doing is we'll be applying the same binding to the armholes. And I may actually, you know what, I'm going to do that right now. Not on screen, because there's going to be a whole lot of hand stitching as well. And then we'll be doing the side seams and a French seam, and we'll be hemming it and we'll be done. So I'm pretty sure we'll be finishing this up tomorrow night if nothing goes horribly wrong in the next little while. Okay, thanks very much for joining me, everyone. I want to put a shout out to some really cool things that I've been learning lately. Also, if you're into the idea of sewing your own panties or underwear, men, you can do this too. Or any gendered body can sew underwear. we don't have to gender this undergarment. This woman called Liz has a YouTube channel called Liz Sews, and she has a link. Maybe I'll share the link in the description of this video, and she shows you how to draft your own knickers with your body measurements. And then there's another video on how to change the style lines of it to make them look attractive and not just granny panties. So this is not, these underwear won't work if you have extra body parts tacked on the front. There's more complexity to making space for that. If you don't want to leave extra space in your knickers for body parts on the front, then this pattern will work for you. So I'll put the link to that in the description. And otherwise, thanks very much for joining me again. I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel so that I know people actually care I'm making these videos. I'm having a good time, and I hope people will start watching them. So thanks very much, everyone. Have a good night. As Bonnie Henry says, stay calm, stay safe, or be calm, be safe, be kind, something like that. All right. Good night, everyone.